She shouted, "Kneel or die." The human just smiled, "Try me." Within this orbiting citadel, many alien species had gathered, some enslaved, some free, but all lived under the iron rule of Velira, the most feared warlord in this part of the galaxy. Her reputation alone was enough to make planets surrender without a fight. Her armies were numerous, her weapons unmatched, and her mind cunning beyond any mortal imagination. On this particular day, the tension in the station's main hall was almost tangible. Aliens of all shapes and sizes crowded the space, their multiple eyes wide with unease, their limbs tense. The air buzzed with a mixture of fear and anticipation. No one had ever seen a human come here, to the very heart of Velira's domain, and challenge her. Humans were a curious species, small, fragile, and unpredictable, but they were rarely considered dangerous. Captain Elias Kane strode through the corridors, his boots clanging against the metallic floors with a confidence that seemed absurd to anyone who had seen the warlord's fleets conquer entire worlds. His uniform was simple, practical, and without the decorations most other officers wore, yet it carried an aura of quiet authority. His brown eyes scanned the surroundings, alert but calm. Unlike the other species, he showed no trace of fear, no hesitation. A squad of Velira's elite guards blocked his path. They were tall, four-armed, and heavily armored. Their mandibles clicked in warning, and their glowing eyes burned with suspicion. Elias stopped, holding his hands in front of him, not in surrender but in a gesture of peaceful defiance. "Captain Kane," one of the guards said, his voice deep and resonant, "you are not allowed beyond this point. The warlord does not receive outsiders." Elias smiled faintly, tilting his head. "Then I will just have to be the first outsider she does receive." His voice was steady, confident, carrying a calm that made the aliens shift uneasily. The guards exchanged nervous glances. It was unheard of for a human to speak this way. Most would tremble, beg, or immediately comply. Not Elias. They hesitated, but his presence was not one that could be ignored. After a tense moment, they stepped aside, letting him pass. The main hall was vast, with high ceilings that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Light from the distant star outside poured in through massive windows, illuminating the faces of those gathered. Velira sat at the far end of the hall, her form imposing and regal. Her skin shimmered with a faint metallic glow, her eyes piercing and golden, and her long hair floated as if underwater. Her presence alone was enough to silence whispers. She rose from her throne as Elias approached, her movements graceful but lethal. Every step seemed to echo through the hall, demanding attention. Around her, guards and lieutenants followed, their posture rigid with respect and fear. "You dare enter my hall uninvited?" Velira's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "You know what happens to those who defy me." Elias stopped a few meters from her, keeping his head high. He studied her carefully, noting the strength in her stance, the sharpness in her eyes. "I know exactly what happens," he said calmly. "But I also know what I'm willing to do." The room fell into complete silence. No one dared breathe, and even the hum of the station seemed to pause. Velira's gaze sharpened. A slight smile touched her lips, more curious than amused. She had faced countless challengers, rebels, spies, even generals from rival empires. But something about this human was different. There was no arrogance, no panic. Just a calm, unshakable determination that made her pulse quicken with intrigue. "You speak boldly," she said, tilting her head. "Do you understand the risk? One word from me and your life ends before your body hits the floor." Elias took a slow breath. He could feel the weight of the stares from every corner of the room, the fear, the tension, the anticipation. Yet he remained steady. "I understand," he said, "and I accept it." Velira's smile disappeared, replaced with a flicker of irritation. She had not expected submission. Every being before him had either pleaded for mercy or turned away in terror. This human stood like a mountain, unmoved by fear. The golden glow of her eyes intensified, and the air in the hall seemed to thrum with power. "Then kneel," she commanded, her voice slicing through the silence. "Show the respect every being in this room owes me. Kneel or die." Elias paused, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Try me," he said simply. A murmur ran through the audience. Some of the alien spectators gasped, others froze in shock. To speak to Velira this way was beyond reckless, it was unheard of. Yet there he stood, human, defiant, and unafraid. Velira's eyes narrowed. She was a master of strategy, a being who could bend entire fleets and populations to her will. And yet, this human, with no army behind him and no weapons in hand, dared to challenge her. Her instincts screamed that this was either foolish bravery or dangerous cunning. She raised her hand, and a wave of energy pulsed through the hall. The lights flickered, and the air seemed to hum with power. Guards tensed, bracing for an attack, but Elias did not move. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His calm presence was like a rock in the middle of a storm. Velira's energy pulse washed over him, probing his mind, searching for fear. Most beings would crumble under such psychic pressure, their thoughts exposed, their deepest fears laid bare. But Elias held steady. He had trained for this not just physically but mentally. Every step he took, every breath was calculated. The human mind, resilient and adaptable, allowed him to resist where others would have broken. The warlord's curiosity deepened. She motioned for her guards to step back, observing him carefully. Most would kneel, most would die. You human, you are either very brave or very foolish. Elias tilted his head slightly. Or maybe I just don't see a reason to kneel to someone who fears what she cannot control. His words were deliberate, clear, and carried a weight that made the warlord pause. The tension in the hall was electric. The gathered aliens watched, some in awe, others in disbelief. A single human without reinforcements, without weapons, dared to stand against the most feared warlord in known space. It was not just courage. They had never seen a human like this. He was a puzzle, a challenge, and possibly a spark of hope. Velira's lips curved into a faint smile, though it was more a predator studying prey than amusement. She stood tall, her aura of power radiating in waves. "You leave me no choice," she said, her voice low, dangerous. "I will test you. You will learn what it means to face true power." Elias' smile did not falter. "I've faced many things," he said calmly, "and I've learned that strength alone does not always win." With a flick of her hand, Velira summoned a panel of controls in midair. Energy shields shimmered across the hall, weapons systems hummed to life, and a series of holographic combat simulations materialized around them. It was a test, a gauntlet designed to break spirits and minds alike. Every creature in the room knew that many who had entered such trials had never returned. Elias surveyed the scene. His mind raced, calculating, predicting, and planning. The gauntlet would be dangerous, but he had confidence in his abilities. More than confidence, he had a deep understanding of his own limits and a willingness to push past them. As the first wave of trials began, the audience held its collective breath. Velira's gaze bore into him, expecting fear, hesitation, or surrender, but Elias only smiled. In that moment, a simple truth became clear to everyone watching. Humans were not as weak as they appeared. Their resilience, their unpredictability, and their courage made them a species to be reckoned with. One human had stepped into the heart of a tyrant's empire and refused to bow. And in doing so, he had set the stage for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of power in the galaxy. The challenge had begun. And Elias Kane, with nothing but his wits, courage, and determination, was ready to face it head-on. The hall of Velira's space station pulsed with energy as Captain Elias Kane stepped forward, unshaken by the tyrant's presence. The gauntlet Velira had summoned hovered in midair, a shimmering labyrinth of energy barriers, holographic enemies, and shifting platforms. The trials were designed not merely to kill, but to break the mind and spirit of anyone who dared challenge her. Elias studied the layout carefully. The energy barriers shifted unpredictably, forming walls, floors, and ceilings in a seemingly random pattern. Holographic warriors emerged from every direction, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. Even though they were illusions, Elias knew the gauntlet was designed to respond to his reactions. Panic or hesitation would trigger deadly countermeasures. Velira's voice echoed across the hall. "Show me, human, show me the limits of your species. Survive this, and perhaps I will reconsider your place here. Fail, and you will know the cost of defiance." Elias did not respond. He simply smiled faintly, his brown eyes calm and focused. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, he began his approach. The first holographic warrior lunged at him, a massive figure with 6 limbs, each ending in razor-sharp claws. Its face was alien, grotesque, and terrifying, yet Elias moved with precision. He dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding a swipe, and then rolled, using his momentum to flip behind a shifting energy barrier. The barrier shimmered as if alive, testing his reaction, but he stayed calm, predicting its movements. As he moved, Elias realized the trial was not merely physical. The holographic warriors seemed to anticipate his strategy, adapting to his actions as if they could think. Every attack required him to remain one step ahead, to anticipate patterns, and to improvise on the fly. He studied the warriors' movements carefully, noting subtle hints in their timing, in the way their energy weapons glowed before striking. A second wave of warriors appeared, this time smaller and faster. They surrounded him from multiple directions. Elias acted quickly, using his environment to his advantage. He jumped onto a floating platform, flipping backward as energy beams shot past him. One warrior lunged, and he grabbed a shifting energy barrier, swinging himself like a pendulum to evade the attack. Every movement was precise, efficient, and deliberate. Valira watched silently, her golden eyes narrowed in thought. Most beings would have panicked by now, their fear betraying them with trembling hands or hesitant steps. But Elias remained calm, almost unnervingly so. He analyzed, adapted, and responded. She had faced countless generals and warriors, yet few had ever shown such clarity under pressure. The gauntlet shifted suddenly, walls and platforms rearranging themselves in a blur of motion. Holographic beams shot across the hall, crisscrossing in a deadly web. Elias didn't hesitate. He calculated the gaps, timing his jumps perfectly. His boots barely touched the shifting platforms before he leaped again, narrowly avoiding a beam that could have severed a limb. Each movement was fluid, like water flowing around obstacles. But this trial was not just about agility. Valira introduced a puzzle mid-challenge. A series of floating energy spheres appeared, each glowing with a different color. Elias noticed a pattern. The spheres pulsed in sequences that corresponded to the attacks of the holographic warriors. The wrong move would trigger another wave of attacks and perhaps a fatal strike. Elias paused, taking a deep breath. His mind raced, analyzing the sequence. Red, blue, green, yellow, he recognized the rhythm, the pattern hidden within the chaos. With careful precision, he touched the spheres in the correct order. Each sphere responded with a soft hum, signaling success. Instantly, the holographic warriors faltered, their attacks weakening, their movements losing synchronization. Valira's eyes widened slightly. Impressive, but the trial had only just begun. Next, the walls of the hall began to close in, slowly but relentlessly. The energy barriers shifted to form a narrowing corridor, forcing Elias to move quickly. At the same time, a massive holographic beast appeared ahead, a creature with tentacles and armored scales, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Its roar vibrated through the hall, designed to intimidate and disorient. Elias didn't falter. He studied the creature carefully. Its movements were heavy but deliberate, predictable once understood. Using his speed and the shifting platforms, he dodged the first strike. The beast's tentacle slammed down where he had been standing moments before. Elias leapt onto a platform, swinging over the creature's head, and then rolled behind it as it turned. The beast lashed out again. This time, Elias didn't just dodge. He used a small, metallic tool from his belt to manipulate the energy barriers. A barrier slid under the creature's legs, tripping it and causing it to crash against the wall. The holographic beast faltered, giving Elias just enough time to sprint past it, heading toward the next challenge. As he advanced, Valira increased the difficulty. Gravity fields fluctuated unpredictably, pulling him upward, then slamming him downward. Platforms rotated and disappeared, forcing him to calculate each move with precision. Yet he adapted. Humans, he thought, were built for survival. We learn quickly, improvise when needed, and find strength in unexpected places. His mind worked faster than any machine, predicting patterns, reacting instinctively, and exploiting the smallest openings. The hall seemed endless, but Elias pressed on. He dodged, leapt, and manipulated the environment with skill that defied expectation. Each success built his confidence, and yet he remained cautious, knowing that one mistake could cost him everything. Valira's tone finally broke the silence. "You are clever, human," she said, almost begrudgingly. "Few have ever endured this far. But this is where your mind will face its ultimate test." A massive holographic puzzle appeared ahead, a labyrinth of floating platforms, each connected by thin beams of energy. The paths were constantly shifting, disappearing and reappearing without warning. At the same time, holographic warriors patrolled the corridors, their eyes scanning for movement. Elias realized that brute force would accomplish nothing here. He had to think, plan, and act with precision. He paused at the entrance, observing the labyrinth. There was a rhythm to the changes, a pattern hidden within the chaos. He noted the timing of the platforms, the speed of the beams, and the positions of the patrols. Then, like a dancer on a stage, he began moving. Step by step, he advanced, timing each leap, each movement with careful calculation. One misstep would send him plummeting into a void of holographic energy, triggering the gauntlet's fail-safe. Yet Elias remained calm. He had faced danger before in far more confined spaces, against opponents far stronger than any illusion. As he progressed, the holographic warriors noticed him, converging from multiple directions. Elias didn't panic. He used the beams to his advantage, baiting the warriors into missteps, guiding them into collisions with shifting barriers. Each move was deliberate, each action maximizing his skill and environment. Slowly, the labyrinth began to yield to his ingenuity. Valira watched silently, her curiosity piqued. No human had ever survived this far. His ability to anticipate, adapt, and improvise in real time was extraordinary. She could feel a strange mix of frustration and admiration. This species, small and fragile as it seemed, had a resilience she had not predicted. Finally, Elias reached the center of the labyrinth. The floor beneath him glowed, signaling the completion of the gauntlet. He stood there, breathing steadily, unscathed, unbroken, and unbowed. The holographic warriors dissolved, the shifting platforms stabilized, and the energy barriers dimmed. Valira's voice echoed through the hall, quieter now, tinged with something unfamiliar. "Impressive, human. You have survived what no other being could endure. Your mind is quick, your reflexes sharp, and your courage remarkable. But do not mistake survival for victory. This is only the beginning." Elias looked around, surveying the hall and the gathered spectators. He did not smile arrogantly, nor did he boast. His calm presence alone was enough to unsettle the aliens who had doubted him. His eyes met Valira's, steady and unyielding. "I am ready for whatever comes next," he said simply. A murmur ran through the audience. The enslaved species began to whisper among themselves, their fear giving way to awe. If one human could survive Valira's trials, perhaps resistance was possible. Perhaps courage and intelligence could challenge even the most fearsome tyrant in the galaxy. Valira's golden eyes narrowed as she considered the human before her. Elias Kane was not like the others. He was clever, resourceful, and unflinching. His survival had not been luck. It had been skill, determination, and an understanding of herself that few could match. She realized that defeating him would require more than brute force. It would require cunning, strategy, and perhaps something she had long forgotten: respect for an opponent. The first test had ended, but the warlord knew this was only the opening move. Elias had survived the gauntlet, but the trials of mind and body were far from over. And in the quiet of the hall, one truth became clear. This human was no ordinary opponent. He was something far more dangerous, a being who refused to bow, who could think, adapt, and survive against impossible odds. And that was exactly the challenge Valira had not expected. The hall was quiet after Elias Kane had completed the first gauntlet. The echoes of energy pulses and collapsing holographic warriors had faded, leaving only a tense silence. Valira's golden eyes remained fixed on him, her face a mixture of curiosity, frustration, and grudging respect. No one had ever survived her trials so far, and certainly not with such calm and confidence. The audience of enslaved aliens, who had come to watch this spectacle in fear, now whispered among themselves. Many of them had given up hope long ago, believing that their lives were nothing but property of the warlord. Yet here was a human, a small, fragile creature by comparison, walking through impossible challenges with steady courage. Their whispers grew louder, tinged with hope and admiration. Elias took a moment to catch his breath. Sweat dotted his forehead, and his chest rose and fell with careful, controlled breaths. He had used every ounce of his skill and intelligence to survive the first gauntlet. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. Valira would not be satisfied with a single demonstration of courage. She was a warlord who sought total control, and defiance, even clever defiance, would not be allowed to continue unchecked. Valira rose slowly from her throne, her presence filling the hall like a shadow over the light. She moved toward Elias, her steps measured and deliberate. The air seemed to hum with energy around her, a tangible force that spoke of power and authority. "You have done well, human," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I must admit your mind and courage surpass my expectations, yet bravery alone cannot win wars and cunning alone cannot save a life. Tell me, why do you risk so much to defy me?" Elias met her gaze without flinching. "Because submission is not the only way," he said simply. "Because fear may control others, but it does not control me. And because hope can inspire far more than terror ever could." Velira's eyes narrowed. His words were simple, yet they carried weight. She had ruled countless systems through fear, through intimidation, through the very method of making every being kneel. Yet this human spoke of hope and courage, concepts she had long dismissed as weaknesses. "You speak as if your species is extraordinary," she said, though the edge in her voice was softened by curiosity. "Yet humans are small, fragile, and ill-equipped for battle against my fleets." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe. But sometimes it is not the size or strength of the body that matters. It is the strength of the mind, the clarity of thought, and the courage to act that makes the difference." The aliens in the hall shifted uncomfortably. Many had never heard such words spoken so openly in Velira's presence. They looked at Elias with new eyes, a spark of inspiration kindling in their hearts. If one human could face the warlord and survive, perhaps they could find courage too. Perhaps resistance was not impossible. Velira's voice cut through the murmurs. "Enough talk. Words do not inspire loyalty, they bring death." She raised her hand and the hall shifted again. A massive holographic arena emerged, far larger and more complex than the previous gauntlet. Platforms floated high in the air, energy bridges connected impossible distances, and hundreds of holographic enemies began to appear, each more dangerous than the last. Elias stepped forward without hesitation. He could feel the weight of the audience's eyes on him. He could feel Velira's gaze, sharp and calculating. He knew that every move he made would be analyzed, every success or failure noted. Yet he remained calm, aware that the greatest weapon he had was not brute strength but his mind and determination. The first wave of holographic enemies lunged. Elias dodged, rolled, and jumped with skill that left even seasoned soldiers in awe. He used the shifting platforms to his advantage, luring enemies into traps created by the arena itself. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate. But this trial was different from the first. This time, Velira added complexity that went beyond physical skill. Illusions appeared, images of friends, allies, and even himself, designed to distract and confuse. Some illusions whispered doubts, others shouted threats, and a few mimicked the forms of Velira's own warriors. Elias paused for a moment, studying the illusions. His mind raced. How could he separate truth from trickery? Then, with a clarity born from focus and training, he realized the key. The illusions could not affect what he knew to be real. They were distractions, designed to exploit fear and hesitation. He ignored them, moving with precision, striking only at the tangible threats in front of him. One by one, the holographic warriors faltered under his calculated actions. Velira's lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The human was clever, more clever than she had anticipated. Yet she did not lower her guard. She summoned another wave, this one faster and more unpredictable. Energy beams crisscrossed the arena, forcing Elias to think quickly and adapt faster than before. He leapt from one platform to another, using his small size and agility to his advantage. A holographic warrior lunged from above, and he twisted midair, using its own momentum to send it crashing into another enemy. Another group approached from the left, and he rolled through a narrow gap, knocking them into the energy bridges. Every movement was a combination of strategy, timing, and instinct. The audience watched in awe. Aliens who had lived under Velira's rule for decades had never seen such skill and bravery. Whispers of admiration and disbelief filled the hall. Some of the enslaved species began to exchange hopeful glances. Perhaps this human was not just surviving. Perhaps he was showing them a path they had long thought impossible. As Elias advanced deeper into the arena, he noticed a pattern in the attacks. Velira was testing more than his physical skill. She was testing his perception, his ability to see through chaos and anticipate what came next. He adjusted his movements accordingly, predicting the paths of enemies, timing jumps with the rotation of platforms, and using the energy beams to create openings. Despite the danger, he felt a sense of calm. Humans, he knew, had a unique ability to adapt. They could learn from mistakes, improvise when necessary, and act with creativity in ways that many species could not. He used that adaptability now, thinking several moves ahead, turning the arena itself into a tool rather than an obstacle. Suddenly, the arena shifted dramatically. The platforms rose higher, the energy beams became more erratic, and the holographic warriors multiplied. Elias realized that the final challenge was approaching. He paused for a brief moment, taking a deep breath, and then advanced with renewed focus. At the center of the arena appeared a massive holographic construct, a towering figure with multiple arms and glowing eyes. It was designed to overwhelm and intimidate, to crush anyone who dared to approach. Elias studied it carefully. Its attacks were powerful but slow and predictable. He noticed the timing of its movements, the way it shifted its weight before striking. Using the platforms and his agility, he dodged its first strike. The giant swung again, and he leapt over one arm, rolling onto a lower platform. Then, using a small metallic tool from his belt, he manipulated the energy beams, creating a path that forced the construct to stumble. Step by step, he advanced, avoiding every strike, exploiting every weakness. Finally, with a swift and precise move, he triggered a mechanism that caused the construct to collapse into itself, dissolving into harmless light. The arena stabilized, and the holographic warriors vanished. Elias stood at the center, breathing steadily, victorious. Valira's golden eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. She had expected him to fail, to panic, or to hesitate. Yet he had survived not only through skill but through intelligence, courage, and adaptability. Her pride in her own power conflicted with a growing admiration for the human standing before her. The audience erupted in quiet murmurs of astonishment. The enslaved aliens began to whisper, their fear giving way to inspiration. One human had survived Valira's trials, and done so with a calm and cleverness that none of them had thought possible. Elias did not boast or celebrate. He simply stood, his gaze steady, aware that the trials were far from over. But in that moment, a spark had been lit. A spark that could grow into hope, into resistance, into something that could challenge even the most powerful warlord in the galaxy. Valira's voice cut through the whispers. "You survive with skill, human, but the battle is far from over. Remember this, courage alone will not win wars. You must prove more than bravery. You must prove strategy, intelligence, and endurance. Your journey has only begun." Elias nodded slightly, his calm demeanor unchanged. "I understand," he said, "and I am ready for whatever comes next." For the first time in the history of her conquests, Valira felt a twinge of uncertainty. This human was not like the others. He was clever, fearless, and resilient. He was not merely surviving, he was inspiring. And inspiration, she realized, was a force far more dangerous than any weapon she commanded. The hall remained tense as the echoes of the trials faded. Yet the message was clear to everyone watching. Humans were more than they appeared. Small, seemingly fragile, and often underestimated, they possessed an inner strength, adaptability, and courage that could rival even the greatest powers in the galaxy. Elias Kane had survived the gauntlet. He had not bowed, he had not faltered, and he had not wavered. And in doing so, he had become a symbol that defiance, until the aftermath of the trials left the hall in tense silence. Valira's golden eyes burned with a mixture of anger and fascination. Captain Elias Kane had survived her most challenging gauntlet, demonstrating agility, intelligence, and courage that no other being had ever shown. For a warlord who thrived on fear and control, this was a dangerous anomaly. Valira knew she could not simply eliminate him yet. His defiance had sparked something unexpected. The alien audience, previously obedient and fearful, now whispered among themselves with glimmers of hope. That spark, if left unchecked, could ignite rebellion across her territories. Elias had become more than a human, he had become a symbol. She rose from her throne, her presence commanding silence. "Human," she said, her voice echoing through the hall, "you have survived my challenges, but do not mistake endurance for victory. The galaxy bends to my will, and I do not forgive defiance." Elias' brown eyes met her steadily. "I understand," he replied calmly, "but the galaxy does not bend to fear alone. Power is more than weapons, it is courage, creativity, and the will to act when others hesitate." Valira's eyes narrowed. She had never met a being who could challenge her philosophy so directly. She knew that she would have to change her strategy. Fear alone would not control this human. She decided to test him in a way that went beyond skill. She would challenge his ability to influence others. With a gesture, Valira activated the station's central command. Holographic displays appeared around the hall, showing fleets of warships, orbital defenses, and military forces loyal to her across multiple systems. "Observe," she said, "the strength of my empire. Any attempt at defiance will end in immediate annihilation of anyone foolish enough to follow you." Elias studied the displays carefully. Thousands of warships, billions of lives under threat, all controlled by one ruler. To an ordinary being, it would be overwhelming. But Elias saw not just threats, but opportunities. Every system had weaknesses, every fleet had limitations, and every soldier, no matter how loyal, was influenced by belief and morale. He spoke to the gathered aliens, his voice steady but filled with quiet authority. "Look around you," he said. "Do you see power or do you see fear? Obedience born from terror is fragile. Those who follow without choice will crumble when courage shows the way. You do not need to kneel. You can act. You can resist." Whispers rippled through the hall. The enslaved aliens exchanged glances, some filled with disbelief, others with hope. For the first time in decades, many considered the possibility that defiance was not only possible but achievable. Valira noticed the shift. Her soldiers' expressions wavered. Doubt crept into their eyes, subtle but undeniable. This human was doing more than surviving. He was turning her own army's perception against her. To counter this, Valira decided to put him in a situation where physical skill alone would not suffice. She projected a holographic representation of one of her heavily fortified starbases, complete with its orbital defenses, weapon platforms, and automated soldiers. "Capture this base," she commanded, "and you will earn the right to speak further. Fail and your influence ends here." Elias analyzed the simulation quickly. Direct assault would be impossible, any frontal attack would be annihilated, but humans had a unique advantage: ingenuity and adaptability. He studied the defenses, noting blind spots, timing gaps, and weaknesses in patrol patterns. He mapped a plan in his mind. He would not overpower the base, he would outthink it. Using small drones and remote hacking tools, Elias simulated a sequence of attacks that disabled critical systems while avoiding detection. Each step was precise, calculated, and based on both observation and prediction. The holographic base responded with new challenges: automated countermeasures, unpredictable energy shields, and shifting defense patterns. Yet Elias adapted, staying one step ahead. His mind worked faster than the simulation could anticipate, anticipating Valira's intention in each programmed response. As the final layer of defenses collapsed under his strategy, the gathered aliens watched in amazement. They had expected failure. They had expected fear. Instead, they witnessed a human turning impossible odds into victory through intelligence and careful planning. Valira's lips tightened. She could not deny his success, yet she refused to yield authority. "Impressive," she said, "but simulations are controlled. Let us see if your ingenuity translates to real action." Elias' calm demeanor never wavered. He understood that fear was her weapon, but he had turned it into a weakness. By demonstrating his ability to plan, adapt, and inspire, he had already begun to shift the balance of perception in the hall. Across the station, whispers grew louder. Aliens who had once obeyed without question began to quietly discuss possibilities, questioning their loyalty to a ruler who could be challenged. Elias had sparked something deeper than skill. He had sparked belief. Valira realized that direct force alone would not succeed against him. The human's courage, intelligence, and charisma made him a threat far greater than any fleet or weapon. And for the first time, she understood the danger of underestimating a species she had long dismissed as fragile and weak. The turning point had come. Elias Kane had not only survived, he had turned the rules of engagement to his favor. The trials were no longer just about skill. They were about influence, perception, and the ability to inspire others to act. Valira stepped back, her golden eyes studying him with a new intensity. "You are more dangerous than I imagined," she said quietly. "Not because of your strength, but because you can change the hearts and minds of those around you. That is a weapon I cannot easily counter." Elias' calm smile did not hide the awareness that the real challenge was only beginning. Surviving tests of skill and endurance was one thing. Now he had to navigate the fragile loyalties of entire populations, inspire courage, and challenge a warlord whose power had been absolute for decades. But he was ready. Humans, he knew, thrived in uncertainty. They adapted, they improvised, and they drew strength from courage and principle. And now, with Velira's forces watching, with hope beginning to stir among the oppressed, Elias prepared for the next stage of the battle, turning perception into reality. The first cracks in Velira's empire were forming, invisible but undeniable. And at the center of them all stood one human, calm, clever, and unbowed. The station remained tense, but whispers of hope spread across the hall. Captain Elias Kane had survived impossible trials and demonstrated not only intelligence and courage, but an ability to inspire. Velira, the most feared warlord in known space, had been forced to acknowledge his skill, yet the final confrontation was still ahead. Across the galaxy, the enslaved species that had witnessed the humans' defiance began to stir. Reports of his victories, his ingenuity, and his fearlessness spread through communication networks, reaching planets under Velira's control. A quiet resistance began to form, small but determined. Elias walked calmly through the station, observing the movements of Velira's forces. He noticed subtle signs of hesitation, of doubt. Soldiers who had once obeyed without question now exchanged cautious glances. Even small acts of defiance, skipped salutes, whispered warnings, were spreading among the ranks. Elias understood that change was happening not through force but through example. Velira summoned him to the central command room. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing her fleets, planets, and military installations. "You have done well, human," she said, her golden eyes sharp. "But inspiration alone will not defeat me. You will need more than courage and cleverness if you hope to challenge my authority." Elias studied the displays carefully. He noted the patterns, the strengths and weaknesses of her fleets, and the logistics of her empire. Then, quietly, he formulated a plan. It would not be a battle of brute force. It would be a battle of strategy, psychology, and timing. He would turn Velira's own strength against her. He began by identifying key points of vulnerability in her communication and supply networks. Using remote drones and hacking tools, he disrupted critical systems, creating confusion without direct confrontation. Small skirmishes erupted across her territories, with alien populations taking advantage of the momentary gaps in command. Each act of resistance was precise, coordinated, and fueled by the courage Elias had inspired. Velira's eyes narrowed as she realized what was happening. Her fleets, her soldiers, and even her most loyal lieutenants were reacting unpredictably. Fear had lost its absolute control, and she was forced to adapt quickly. Elias had turned her greatest strength, her empire, into a liability. In the central command room, Elias demonstrated his strategy. He coordinated attacks on key infrastructure points, synchronized uprisings, and provided guidance to the resistance using encrypted channels. His calm, steady demeanor and clever tactics allowed small groups to achieve victories that would have seemed impossible before. Across the galaxy, oppressed species began to rise. Planets once under strict control declared autonomy, using the lessons they had learned from observing the humans' courage. Fleets defected, soldiers hesitated, and Velira's empire, once unshakable, began to fracture. Velira confronted Elias in the station's main hall. Her golden eyes blazed with fury and disbelief. "How can one human command so much without armies?" she demanded. Elias met her gaze calmly. "Because true power is not only measured in weapons and numbers," he said. "It is measured in courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. I do not command through fear, I inspire through example." For the first time, Velira felt the limits of her control. Her authority had been absolute, but this human had exposed its vulnerability. His ingenuity, courage, and leadership had created a movement that could not be crushed by force alone. The final battle was not fought with lasers or fleets, but with the hearts and minds of those she sought to dominate. Across the galaxy, the oppressed united, emboldened by Elias' example. Systems that had once surrendered without resistance now stood firm, refusing to kneel. In the end, Velira retreated, her aura of invincibility shattered. Elias stood tall, unbowed, and victorious, not through destruction but through courage, strategy, and the example he set. The galaxy began to change. Humans, once underestimated, were now recognized as a force of ingenuity and resilience. The oppressed had learned that defiance, intelligence, and courage could challenge even the greatest powers. Elias Kane walked away from the central command room, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations. His calm smile, steady determination, and unwavering courage became legend across the stars. In every corner of the galaxy, beings remembered the human who refused to kneel, who faced impossible odds with intelligence and bravery, and who proved that true strength lies not in weapons, but in the mind and the heart. The story of Elias Kane became a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and ingenuity could ignite hope and change the course of history. Humanity had shone its light in the galaxy, and that light would never be forgotten.